There are stories that were never written down, stories cooked in iron pots, whispered in the smoke, and carried on the scent of wood fire. Stories of people who had almost nothing, yet made everything from it. In the age of slavery, food was not just sustenance, it was survival. Denied land, denied tools, denied choice. The enslaved found power in the smallest act, making a meal from scraps, roots, and memory. Each bite held more than flavor. It held history and hope. These meals were forged in hardship, yet they fed generations. From the hidden gardens behind the slave quarters to the fields where a single pot was shared among many, these foods became testaments of endurance, living threads between West Africa and the new, unyielding soil of America. Some were born from ingenuity, rice boiled in rainwater, cakes baked in ashes. Others were gifts from the earth, sweet potatoes, greens, and wild berries that asked for no permission to grow. Every meal, a quiet rebellion. Every recipe, a memory that refused to die. Tonight, we open those kitchens again. We remember the hands that stirred, the voices that sang softly by the fire, and the hunger that wasn't only for food, but for dignity and freedom. This is the survival foods of the enslaved. A journey through 25 humble dishes that shaped not only the soul of a people, but the flavor of a nation. Number 1, ashcakes, bread baked in the fire. They called it ashcake, a bread so simple it was born right in the fire. No pan, no oven, just cornmeal, a little water, maybe a pinch of salt if you had any. The dough was wrapped in green leaves or laid straight in the ashes of campfire, covered and left to bake beneath the coals. When pulled out, brushed clean, it revealed a hard crust and a soft heart. Warm, smoky, and sustaining. In the 18th and 19th centuries, enslaved Africans across the American South made ashcakes at the edges of fields, in the dark corners of slave quarters, or on journeys through the night. It was a meal that asked nothing but patience and gave back strength. For many, it was all they had between sunrise and sunset. For others, it was the food of flight, packed quietly before escaping toward freedom. Imagine a woman kneeling by a dying fire, pressing dough into the coals, whispering prayers that her child would live to taste something better. What was once a symbol of deprivation became a testament of endurance. Even stripped of tools, they still made bread. Even in ashes, they found sustenance. Ashcakes, the bread of the fire, the bread of the unbroken. Next, we move from the fire to the fields, where sweetness and sweat met in a cup of molasses water, the drink that carried strength through the burning days. Number 2, molasses water, the sweet drink of labor. When the sun rose over the fields, its heat was merciless. For the enslaved, water alone couldn't restore what the day took. So they mixed what little they had. A spoonful of molasses stirred into a pail of creek water. Simple, sweet, and for many, sacred. Molasses was one of the few byproducts enslaved people could access from the sugar or cane plantations. It was heavy with iron, rich with calories, and for those who labored from dawn to dusk, it was fuel, both for the body and the will. Some said a sip could keep you from fainting in the sun. Others said it was like drinking a memory of home, the sweetness of something alive in a world that often wasn't. You can almost see it now, a tin cup passed between calloused hands, the syrup swirling like dark honey. No luxury, just survival. And yet, in that mixture, there was a quiet dignity, a small act of reclaiming strength. Because sometimes strength wasn't loud. It was found in sips, in silence. Next, we move from sweetness to sustenance. A meal built from scraps, yet rich in pride. Fatback and cornbread. Number 3, fatback and cornbread, salt, grease, and grit. Fatback, the thick slab of salted pork skin, was never meant for the enslaved. It was refuse. But in the hands of the hungry, it became gold. Fried crisp, its grease was used to flavor cornbread, beans, or greens, transforming bland rations into food that tasted like life itself. Fatback and cornbread became the cornerstone of survival, a pairing that filled the belly and soothed the spirit. The salt replaced what was lost in sweat. The fat gave warmth in winter. And the cornbread, coarse, humble, golden, stretched the meal enough to feed a family. But this wasn't just sustenance. It was creativity born from necessity. Every spoonful of cornmeal, every drop of grease, told the same story. They couldn't take away flavor. And over generations, this food of hardship became a dish of pride, the foundation of Southern soul food. What once was survival became celebration. From the salt of the field, we moved to the symbol of hope, a dish once made for New Year's, and for luck, Hoppin' John. Number 4. Hoppin' John, the New Year's hope. Black-eyed peas, rice, and bits of pork. A poor man's meal, and yet a feast of meaning. In the quarters, this was more than dinner. It was a prayer. Hoppin' John came from the West African tradition of rice and beans, a dish of community, prosperity, and luck. When enslaved Africans brought it to America, it became a quiet ritual of survival and hope for better days. By the 19th century, Hoppin' John was served on New Year's Day across the South, symbolizing coins and fortune to come. Even those who had almost nothing believed that black-eyed peas might bring luck, that rice might bring plenty, and that pork, scarce as it was, might bring strength. It wasn't about superstition. It was about belief. Belief that life could change. To this day, Hoppin' John sits on countless tables every New Year, a thread connecting freedom to its roots in bondage. Next, we lift the lid on a pot that simmered day and night, greens, bones, and a miracle of nourishment, turnip greens and pot liquor. Number 5. Turnip greens and pot liquor, the vitamin of survival. When the plantation kitchen finished cooking, the scraps were sent down. Stems, wilted leaves, a few pork bones stripped bare. But in the enslaved quarters, those scraps became treasure. Turnip greens were boiled for hours until tender, the bones releasing flavor into the broth. And that broth, called pot liquor, was the real prize. It held every nutrient the greens could give, every drop of salt, every trace of fat. For those who had little meat and less medicine, pot liquor kept bodies strong. Mothers spoon-fed it to children and elders alike. It was bitter, salty, healing. This dish was more than sustenance. It was defiance. It said, "You can give us the leftovers, but we will make them life-giving." Today, Southern cooks still serve pot liquor with pride, unaware they're tasting one of history's greatest acts of resilience. Next, we look to the soil, to the humble legume that crossed oceans and took root again. Cowpeas and field peas. Number 6. Cowpeas and field peas, the hidden crop. Cowpeas, or field peas, were ancient African plants, born in the dry heat of the continent's soil. When enslaved Africans were brought to America, they brought these seeds with them, sometimes braided into their hair, hidden like treasure. Plantation owners thought of cowpeas as animal feed, but the enslaved knew better. They knew their value, rich in protein, easy to grow, resistant to drought. So, in secret gardens or between rows of cotton, they grew them for themselves. A stew of field peas, rice, and salt could feed many. It was quiet defiance, buried in the dirt. Cowpeas became one of the few African crops that survived the Atlantic crossing, a living link to home. Even in a foreign land, these plants thrived, and so did the people who tended them. Next, from the fields of the South to the swamps of memory, we follow another African seed, rice and okra. Number 7. Rice and okra, the African memory dish. Rice and okra, two gifts carried from West Africa's shores. Together, they told a story of memory and adaptation. Enslaved Africans from the Rice Coast, present-day Sierra Leone, Gambia, and Senegal, were deliberately chosen for their expertise. They knew how to flood fields, how to grow rice in harsh climates. That knowledge built fortunes, but none of those riches were their own. In their quarters, they cooked what they could. Rice boiled with okra and bits of meat or fish. Slimy to some, comforting to others. The okra thickened the stew, just like gumbo back home. In that bowl, the Atlantic felt smaller. It was a reminder that, though they had been taken, they had not been erased. Next, we listened to the crackle of comfort, the dish that brought a rare crunch to a soft world, crackling bread. Number 8. Crackling bread, crisp fragments of comfort. Crackling bread was the closest thing to joy that cornmeal could hold. It started with scraps, bits of fried pork skin, saved from the fat back pot, mixed into cornbread batter. When baked, those tiny pieces crisped into golden jewels. The smell filled the cabin, warm, meaty, home-like. To the enslaved, crackling bread was a luxury, made on rare days when pork was shared. It was soft inside, crunchy outside, a small miracle of texture in a world of monotony. Children waited for it. Adults savored it. It was, for a moment, a taste that made the world gentler. What began as poverty food became a Southern delicacy, now found in kitchens that never knew the hunger that created it. Next, we turn to another transformation, grain made safe by wisdom and fire. Hominy. Number 9. Hominy, the reclaimed grain. Corn was everywhere, but it wasn't always safe to eat. Enslaved people learned, through observation and shared knowledge, to soak corn in ash or lye, a process called nixtamalization. It stripped the hull and released vital nutrients. That was hominy, a dish of chemistry and survival. Boiled into grits or mashed into mush, hominy was nourishing, filling, and versatile. And it came from the wisdom of both indigenous Americans and Africans, a meeting of two worlds that had both endured colonization. Hominy became the base for countless meals, proof that survival wasn't about luck, but learning. Now, from the grain to the water's edge, where danger and dinner met under the moonlight, catfish stew. Number 10. Catfish stew, from the river's mercy. After long days in the field, some enslaved people fished at night, quiet, careful, under stars that watched in silence. They used twine, bone hooks, or even their bare hands to catch catfish from muddy rivers. The meat was mild, tender, and free. Boiled with peppers, onions, and sometimes okra, it became catfish stew, a rare, hearty meal shared among families. It was dangerous work. Being caught fishing after curfew could mean punishment. But hunger doesn't wait for permission. For many, that bowl of stew tasted like mercy, the river giving what the world would not. Each spoonful a reminder that nature, even in bondage, could still be kind. Next, we step from the river into the woods, where the enslaved found wild freedom in every hunt. Stewed squirrel and rabbit. Number 11. Stewed squirrel and rabbit, the forest's hidden feast. When the plantation rations ran thin, and they often did, survival meant turning to the woods. There, in the hush of twilight, men and boys would set traps or hunt quietly with makeshift slings. Squirrel, rabbit, possum, whatever could be caught became supper. The meat was tough but filling, stewed slowly in iron pots with wild herbs, roots, or greens. To the enslaved, these weren't delicacies, they were lifelines. But in that act of hunting, there was more than hunger. There was freedom, even if only for a few hours. The forest offered what the overseer could not take: choice, silence, and a taste of self-sufficiency. Elders taught the young where to find rabbit runs, how to move without breaking a twig. Those lessons were not just for food, they were for survival, and sometimes for escape. Every pot of stew carried the scent of independence, wild, smoky, defiant. And from the forest, they turned to the thickets and hedgerows, where sweetness still dared to grow, wild berries and persimmons. Number 12. Wild berries and persimmons, sweetness from the thicket. In a world where sweetness was rare, the taste of wild fruit felt almost like a dream. Blackberries, dewberries, muscadine grapes, all grew untamed at the edges of fields. Children gathered them in cloth aprons or hollow gourds, staining their fingers purple. Persimmons, too, soft and golden when ripe, became nature's dessert. For the enslaved, these fruits weren't just snacks. They were vitamins. They were joy. Some were boiled into syrups or baked into makeshift cobblers over coals. Others were dried for the cold months when the world turned gray and empty. Each berry held a memory of sweetness unowned by the master, a gift that no one could price or ration. And in every mouthful, a reminder that beauty still grew wild, even in bondage. Next, we go from fruit to the fire pit, to one of the most resourceful dishes of all, organ meats and chitlins. Number 13, organ meats and chitlins, the refusal to waste. When the plantation slaughterhouse worked, the best cuts went to the master's table. What remained, intestines, liver, heart, feet, were tossed aside. But the enslaved did not see waste. They saw possibility. With patience and fire, they turned what others discarded into nourishment. Intestines were cleaned, boiled, and seasoned into chitlins, a dish that filled the air with a smell some loved, others endured, but all respected. Liver was fried with onions. Feet and tails simmered until tender. These dishes required labor and time, the very things enslaved people had too little of. But they did it anyway, because feeding one's family was an act of love and defiance. Organ meats became symbols of transformation, a lesson in making the unwanted beautiful. What began as survival food became the soul of Southern cooking, carried forward by those who refused to waste anything, not even hope. From the iron pot, we turn to something small, a red spark of flavor that changed every meal: red pepper and spice. Number 14, red pepper and spice, fire from the ashes. Where did the heat come from? In a world of bland cornmeal and watery stews, enslaved cooks found a way to bring fire, literally, into their food. They grew small red peppers in hidden corners of their gardens, drying them in the sun and grinding them into powder. Just a pinch transformed an entire pot. Pepper was medicine, too, warming the body, clearing sickness, and sparking appetite when hunger dulled the senses. For those who lived under constant control, this spice became something sacred, a taste of Africa's fire, smuggled, planted, and kept alive. To this day, that bold seasoning runs through Southern and Creole cooking, proof that even the smallest seed can carry a continent's memory. And now, we turn to the food that defined mornings, comfort, and community: grits and cornmeal mush. Number 15, grits and cornmeal mush, morning on the plantation. Before dawn, before the fields filled with voices, there was silence and the smell of boiling cornmeal. It was the first meal of the day. Grits, or mush, were made by slowly stirring ground corn into boiling water or milk, then thickened over the fire. It was cheap, filling, and endlessly adaptable. Sometimes molasses was added for sweetness. Other times, salt or a bit of fat back for substance. Children ate it for breakfast. Adults carried it in tin cups to the fields. This dish became a symbol of continuity: simple, soft, reliable. Even when the world changed, grits remained. After emancipation, they followed families into freedom, onto sharecropping farms, and later into kitchens across the South. From the enslaved to the free, the humble bowl of grits endured, a comfort food born from endurance itself. Next, we move to the sea, where survival meant risking everything for the taste of salt and freedom: oyster and fish stew. Number 16, oyster and fish stew, the saltwater secret. For those enslaved near the coast, the ocean was both prison and provider. It whispered of freedom, and yet it also gave food when the land would not. Oysters clung to rocks and creek beds, waiting to be gathered by hand. Fish nets, made from twisted fibers or discarded rope, were cast at low tide. From this came the humble oyster and fish stew, a dish as briny as the sea, flavored with onion, pepper, and sometimes a splash of milk if fortune allowed. It wasn't just sustenance. It was survival from the salt water's mercy. Men risked whippings to gather from forbidden shores. Women cooked the catch in iron pots, stretching the stew to feed a dozen mouths. The taste was rich, smoky, alive, a reminder that even in bondage, nature offered a quiet defiance. And when freedom finally came, many carried this seaside wisdom inland, keeping the flavor of the coast alive in the heart of the South. From the sea, we now return to the earth, to the leaves that held both food and creativity, corn husk dumplings. Number 17. Corn husk dumplings, ingenuity in the ashes. When flour was scarce and ovens were a dream, enslaved cooks turned again to corn. Not just the grain, but the husk. They filled the leaves with cornmeal, dough mixed with water or molasses, then tied them shut with string or vine and dropped them into boiling pots. The result, corn husk dumplings, soft, sweet, and steaming. Some called them ash dumplings because when there was no pot, they were baked right in the coals. Their scent filled the air, smoky, homey, comforting. Children loved them. Elders taught how to twist the husk just right so it wouldn't burst in the boil. In everyone, there was memory of Africa's wrapped foods, of tamales learned from indigenous neighbors, of making something from nothing. Corn husk dumplings were more than food. They were art. Proof that even the humblest materials could be shaped into beauty. And for the heart's warmth, we turn to the open fields, where even the weeds became dinner. Wild greens and dandelions. Number 18. Wild greens and dandelions, the medicine in the meadow. Where others saw weeds, the enslaved saw life. Dandelions, chickweed, poke salad, plantain, all grew wild at the edge of fields. To the enslaved, they were more than greens, they were medicine. Picked by hand and boiled to remove their bitterness. These plants became a tonic against hunger and sickness. The liquid spring tea was said to clean the blood. The greens, eaten with vinegar or salt, replaced what long labor took away. This was knowledge carried from Africa, where every plant had purpose, and it blended with the teachings of indigenous healers, creating a living pharmacy in the soil. The enslaved didn't just survive on these greens. They healed with them. And that wisdom still lives on in southern kitchens, in dishes like poke salad or mess of greens, born from the same resilience that once grew in secret. Now, from greens to gold, the root that sweetened both hunger and hope, sweet potato cakes. Number 19. Sweet potato cakes, the taste of comfort. Sweet potatoes were one of the few crops enslaved people could often grow for themselves. Buried deep in the earth, they were hearty, forgiving, and sweet. Mashed with molasses, shaped into small cakes, and cooked on flat stones or cast iron, sweet potato cakes became a cherished treat. Soft, warm, and fragrant, they carried the memory of home, a sweetness untouched by cruelty. Some families saved them for Sundays, the one day of relative rest. Others packed them secretly for long journeys, fuel for escape or freedom. In a world of scarcity, these cakes meant more than flavor. They meant care. Mothers would make them at night, when the fields fell silent, whispering lullabies as the cakes browned over the fire. Today, every sweet potato pie and casserole still echoes that quiet act of love, proof that sweetness can rise even from the darkest soil. Next, we turn to the drink that soothed and strengthened, sassafras tea. Number 20. Sassafras tea, the root of strength. In the woods grew a tree whose roots smelled of spice and smoke, the sassafras. Boiled in water, it made a reddish tea that was earthy, sharp, and strangely comforting. Enslaved people drank it for warmth, for energy, and for medicine. It was believed to cleanse the blood, soothe fever, and chase away fatigue. Some mixed it with molasses or mint. Others drank it plain, savoring its bold, wild taste. It was more than a drink, it was connection, a root shared between African and indigenous traditions, passed quietly from hand to hand, generation to generation. Sassafras tea became a ritual of rest in a life of endless labor. Each sip, a reminder that healing could still be found, if one knew where to look. Next, we move from the quiet of the woods to the comfort of the firelight, where flour, grease, and grit came together in one final act of resourcefulness. Hoe cakes and Johnny cakes. Number 21. Hoe cakes, bread from the blade. They called them hoe cakes, not because of the garden tool, but because that's where they were cooked. Flat rounds of cornmeal batter fried right on the blade of a hoe, held over the fire after long hours in the field. It was the simplest of foods: cornmeal, water, a bit of grease if fortune allowed. Yet it carried the warmth of invention, a worker's bread made with nothing but grit and will. The enslaved would eat them hot, folded in half like a sandwich, sometimes spread with molasses or salt pork fat. It was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner too. And while overseers saw just another ration, the enslaved knew. Each hoe cake was proof of ingenuity, of making something good with nothing at all. Even after emancipation, hoe cakes stayed on Southern tables, their flavor a quiet reminder of endurance and of hands that refused to stop creating, even in chains. From the blade of the hoe, we travel back to the memory of Africa, carried in a single ingredient: groundnuts. Number 22. Groundnut stew, the African memory in a pot. Peanuts, or groundnuts, as they were called in Africa, came across the Atlantic not as cargo, but as memory. In the hands of the enslaved, they became one of the few tastes that still belonged to them. Mashed in a paste and stirred with onions, okra, or bits of meat, they made groundnut stew creamy, rich, deeply familiar. It was a dish of home, remade in exile. Those who cooked it often whispered stories of ancestors, of markets along the Niger, of the scent of roasted nuts in the heat of the sun. Each pot connected generations across oceans. And though the plantation system sought to erase identity, groundnut stew preserved it, flavor by flavor, memory by memory. That same peanut would later transform into one of America's staple crops, another gift from the enslaved that the world forgot to credit. Next, we step into the kitchen again, where survival and salt met in a humble feast: cabbage and salt meat. Number 23. Cabbage and salt meat, the shared pot. When the cold months came, the fields fell quiet, but the hunger did not. Salted meat and cabbage became the heart of many winter meals. The meat, often tough and brined, was boiled for hours with cabbage, onions, and a bit of fat. The salt drew flavor into the greens, and the broth became a kind of comfort few could afford. This was the shared pot, one meal, many spoons. It filled the stomach and, for a moment, softened the world. Cabbage and salt meat wasn't luxury. It was community, a reminder that, even in bondage, they shared what they had. No one left hungry if the pot still held something warm. Long after slavery ended, that shared pot lived on in kitchens and churches alike, proof that togetherness was the truest form of survival. Next, we turn from salt to sweetness, the dessert that asked for no sugar: vinegar pie. Number 24. Vinegar pie, sweetness without sugar. Imagine a world without sugar. For the enslaved, sugar, though grown by their hands, was a treasure they rarely tasted. So when cravings for sweetness struck, they turned to what they had: vinegar, eggs, flour, and hope. Vinegar pie was a miracle of chemistry and creativity. Mixed with a bit of molasses or syrup, vinegar replaced lemon, creating a tangy, custard-like filling baked in rough crusts. It tasted like something between lemon pie and caramel, sharp and comforting all at once. To those who knew deprivation, this dessert was joy in disguise. It wasn't just pie. It was proof that even bitterness, when tempered by patience and warmth, could become sweet. And now, we end where hunger finally met hope, with a meal that marked the dawn of freedom, the Emancipation Feast. Number 25. The Emancipation Feast, the first taste of freedom. When freedom came, slowly, unevenly, uncertainly, it came with hunger. But this time, the hunger meant something different. In 1865, when word of emancipation reached the last enslaved people in Texas, they celebrated not with gold or wine, but with food. Collard greens for fortune, pork for prosperity, sweet bread for joy, and red drinks, hibiscus, strawberry, sorrel, for life itself. That gathering became the roots of what we now know as Juneteenth. Every bite was sacred. Every plate was a declaration. We made it. The Emancipation Feast wasn't about plenty. It was about peace. For the first time, they cooked because they wanted to, not because they had to. And in that first free meal, they tasted the one thing that had always been denied: choice. Every dish we've remembered tonight, every scrap turned into a feast, every leaf boiled into healing, was an act of resistance. Through food, the enslaved preserved their identity, their ingenuity, and their hope. The survival foods of the plantation were not just recipes. They were revolutions in disguise. They turned ashes into bread, bitterness into sweetness, and hunger into heritage. And long after chains were broken, their flavors remained. In soul food kitchens, in family gatherings, in every table where laughter and struggle coexist. So tonight, as we remember these meals, we remember the people who made them, the hands that stirred, the hearts that endured, the spirits that refused to vanish. This is the world tapestry, where every flavor tells a story, and every story deserves to be remembered. If this journey moved you, we invite you to subscribe, not just to a channel, but to a legacy, because the past still feeds us, and its taste is freedom. There's something sacred about remembering through food. The hands that stirred these pots, they were tired, blistered, and bound. Yet they made beauty out of what the world tried to discard. Every ashcake, every bowl of greens, every spoonful of molasses water, they weren't just meals. They were declarations that even in hunger, there was humanity, that even in bondage, there was brilliance. And as centuries passed, these flavors carried forward into soul food kitchens, Sunday dinners, and family reunions where laughter filled the air. The recipes changed, but the spirit never did. When we taste these dishes, we don't just remember what was lost, we honor what survived. We honor the courage, the creativity, and the quiet resistance of a people who refuse to vanish. Thank you for joining us on this journey through memory, struggle, and survival. If this story touched you, subscribe to the World Tapestry, because history isn't just something we study. It's something we keep alive, one story, one meal, one voice at a time.